Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel for the next installment of our investigation into Sir James G. Frazer's The Golden Bough. We're going to be looking at Chapter 7, Incarnate Gods. I'm a little bit removed from this presentation. I've not reviewed my notes today because I've got a lot of different irons in the fire. I'm doing a follow-up to Robert Archery's The African Genesis, its relationship to Stanley Kubrick, specifically looking at the territorial imperative, the next book in that sequence, and the social contract, the third. Jordan just helped me out with that. If you have not seen that on my channel, go check it out. I think it was a pretty cool exploration. And as I'm getting deeper into both the Golden Bough and Ardry's corpus, I'm finding more and more points of intersection, which I hope to elaborate upon as we go. What's it like for you, Jordan, looking at both these texts? And I should say up front, Jordan is standing in and filling a gap here. She's not up to speed on the content we're going to talk about today, but I think she's going to have a lot to offer regardless.
Yeah, I will do my best to be a good participant and audience member, asking some clarifying questions, see if I can stump you. But I'm very excited. And the last one we did was really freaking cool. I think it was awesome. Lots of very tangible examples. I really enjoyed it. It was more of a focused video, I would say, but it goes really deep. So
you're talking about African Genesis and Stanley Kubrick. Yeah, I think so. I think this is going to be more in that vein. So let's get into it, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to walk us through all these this crazy title page, but let me just read this little opening salvo. In Chapter 7 of The Golden Bough, James Frazer traces the evolution of the magician in primitive societies, from a wielder of universal powers to a scientist, through key stages. Early religion's temporary and permanent deification of magicians as man-gods, the rise of sacred kings in organized religion, and the eventual dominance of science, where magic is rejected and magicians become scientists using rational inquiry. This presentation follows Frazer's framework, exploring this progression while touching on related figures and concepts, including John Dee, a transitional alchemist tied to chemistry's rise. If you've been following along in the series, you know that we've talked about John Dee in just about every episode. But also we're going to look at Empedocles, whose deification claims and spherical divine connect ancient ideas to modern thought, and CERN's Alice project, which is in the news, where lead to gold transmutation echoes alchemical legacies and symbolic interpretations. So those are going to be our real world applications that Jordan was alluding to earlier. And if you see here on the title, we've got John Dee, a woodcut of John Dee over here, Johann Dee. And this is the bald fellow that's Empedocles. We have Lord Shiva dancing outside CERN, and I'm gonna close the presentation with a symbolic interpretation of this statue through a Jungian lens. That's gonna be important. Here's the cycle. Empedocles, a cycle, and Carl Jung with the CERN emblem hovering over Frazer's head.
Very cool.
Yeah. I had to actually, when I was working on this yesterday, I thought there's a chance we might film this yesterday, and I was trying to get it all ready, and I was like, I really thought I was kind of getting lost in the details. And so what I did collaboratively with Grok is I really just was like, okay, what are the big philosophical points that I want to try to communicate in this? And I kind of like tore it all up and started over. And Grok and I put together this chart, which you can see in the next slide. Although he's kind of right. Is it Jeremy? Is that the name of the computer for war games? He's kind of writing. Grok is having trouble using the typical style that I write with him in. Looks like a very dated chart. But you know, the struggle that I was having here was, we had our dialectical unfolding with Frazer, understanding how magic gives rise to religion and how religion gives rise to science. But it's not so straightforward. And we have this magician class, and I think if we step back a little bit and think about how the magician as a class and its transformation runs parallel to these larger movements within Frazer, we'll do ourselves a bunch of good rather than me just trying to summarize everything that Frazer says. So if we can keep it here on this chart for a second, I want to talk about magic, or what I'm calling the primitive phase. We've talked about magic as like, from Frazer's point of view, as being a primitive form of science. And Jordan had a nice little clip that we put on my Instagram where I tried to pin her down. It's like, you believe in magic? You think magic is real? I was like, do you understand magic to be like the ultimate science or a primitive science? Have you thought any more about that?
I don't think my position has changed much. I probably just differ in the way I would define both magic and science. Science is more a method of inquiry. I guess if I really had to think about, I don't know. Maybe
well, let's we're going to cover
that's
a
what
lot.
my training taught me, at least. You know.
Well, we'll circle back to that.
Okay.
We're going to be talking a lot about science and magic today. So but last time I think I meant to circle back and I forgot to. So when this closes, I want to see how your understanding of what science and magic are enhanced as a result of this conversation. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
All right. So in the magic or primitive phase, as described by James Frazer in Chapter 7 of The Golden Bough, primitive societies operate under the belief that all beings, humans, animals, and natural forces, possess universal supernatural powers, creating a democratic realm where no sharp distinction exists between gods and humans. So they're all sort of commingling together. We don't have this more modern understanding that God is like outside of reality. And who becomes a god can be a temporary or a permanent situation. We'll get to that in a second. It can happen suddenly. It's be something that a class that you're born into. Magicians emerge as the earliest professional class, practicing magic as a primitive science to control nature, driven by the mistaken belief that their thoughts, expressed through rituals, can directly cause changes in reality, such as bringing rain or ensuring a harvest. Their rituals, rooted in this worldview, lay the foundation for later religious developments as they attempt to manipulate the environment and assert influence in a society where supernatural power is seen as accessible to all. Now, this is where I kind of got hung up. I was thinking like about the religious phase of Frazer being kind of monolithic, but I think the way that I can cognize this is if we split up the early religion aspect of the religious phase from that which arises later, the organized. So we can see it as like divided underneath those two categories, or perhaps see early religion as a transitional stage to the more organized religion. These are my parameters that I'm sort of imposing upon Frazer because I like to have things neat and defined, but obviously in reality, it's not going to be that tidy. So in this early religion phase, as you see here in the second column on the slide, as primitive societies recognize the vastness of nature, they transition into the early religion phase, where the decline of magic gives way to nascent religious practices like prayer and sacrifice. Within this phase, magicians experience temporary deification, becoming briefly possessed or inspired by divine forces, often manifesting as prophecy or ecstatic states, reflecting the still fluid boundary between human and divine. Simultaneously, the most powerful magicians achieve permanent deification, evolving into man-gods or god-kings who are seen as permanently divine and expected to perform miracles, a development that marks the beginning of a more hierarchical understanding of divinity while retaining the rudimentary nature of primitive belief. So far, so good, Jordan?
I think so, and I'm a little hung up on when you were going through the part about magic. Again, this is Frazer's perspective. I'll speak for myself.
Yeah.
I feel pretty convinced that reality can be influenced through non-material methods.
Well, we're going to get what
Have
seems,
you ever experienced such a thing?
I have, I have. Although I don't know if I would chalk it up to magic. I'm still like, I think generally we share a belief that reality is somewhat simulated in some way. Does it make, and it even seems to be responsive to certain individuals' consciousness? Does that necessarily mean that the simulation responding to people's forms of consciousness, does that mean that magic is being practiced? I'm not sure I would give it that label, because there's nothing ritualistic going on when I've experienced it. And this gets into the quantum stuff that we're going to talk about with CERN and the connection between consciousness and particles, right? Which is a major factor of quantum theory, right? This is the issue of observation and how it affects particles.
Totally.
Okay. I know I'm kind of dumping a lot of information right here, but this sets the stage for everything else. It'll be smooth sailing after this, okay? So now we're going to move on to the organized religion phase. And in that phase, the man gods of the early religion phase evolve into sacred kings, consolidating both political and spiritual authority as societies shift from democratic equality to despotic monarchy. Magic, once central, is now rejected as a disreputable black art by the priesthood, which prioritizes prayer and sacrifice over attempts to control nature, marking a formalization of religious practice. The magician class, having given rise to sacred kings, sees its traditional role marginalized, and those who persist in magical practices pushed to the fringes, setting the stage for their eventual adaptation to new societal roles as religious structures become more defined. And we've talked about this a little bit before when we were looking at George Méliès's A Voyage to the Moon, and how he has the astronomers dressed as sorcerers. There is this thread of continuity between the magicians of old and the science class, which comes next.
Who decides who's practicing black magic and who's a good religious person, and why? Why would you make that distinction?
Well, do you recall why the priest, and if that priest is sort of an extension of the sacred king, at least within, say, the way that this is cropped up in European and Christian civilization, right, is that the magicians are in some way controlling nature and turning themselves into gods, whereas they should be doing the supplication. There's something ultimately blasphemous about this from the perspective of a more sophisticated, air quotes, sophisticated form of theology that posits God as sovereign over all of nature. Right. Whereas the magician is saying, no, look, I have control over nature. I can even sort of constrain God if I utter the right incantations. So that's a big part of it. But it's not so black and white. When you read the Bible, it's not so black and white. Okay. But I'm not going to talk about that because we're going to be here an hour and a half anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So the last, what I'm calling here, is the rise of the science phase. Okay. And in the rise of science phase emerges as human knowledge advances, leading to the reinterpretation of religious beliefs and the dominance of rational inquiry over magical and religious frameworks. The remaining magicians, rejected by organized religion for their association with the black art, abandoned sorcery and transitioned into scientists, redirecting their early attempts at understanding nature through magic into systematic observation and experimentation. This phase completes Frazer's evolutionary arc, where the magician class's journey from primitive practitioners to deified figures to sacred kings culminates in their transformation into the progenitors of modern science, reflecting the triumph of empirical thought over earlier systems. So that's really the entire thesis, my understanding of it, of chapter 7. Now, he gives a lot of different examples and episodes of temporary and permanent deification. We're gonna look at those. I'm going to talk about some of my favorites. just to kind of flesh this out a little bit. But before I do that, I'd like to go, unless you want to say something before we go to the next slide.
You know me, I always just want to
Sure, throw something out there.
Stir the pot about. It's one definition of magic. It's one framework. I think I see it a little differently, or there's more nuance, and it's not like this is a survey of people who practice magic.
Well, it's important to keep in mind, and I've perhaps caused some confusion with this because I'm learning this as I go, that what Frazer's talking about is like magic as it becomes this foundation for society in civilizations thousands and thousands of years ago. He's not talking about, I guess, what we would call like ceremonial magic or I'm not even sure he's talking about things like theurgy. I don't know. And I'm not even really sure I understand what those things are. And I've become so fixated with looking at John Dee because John Dee, sort of this Christian Kabbalist, is not really what we're talking about when we're talking about like Aboriginal rainmakers. Like this is like very different. So, but I still think John Dee, not only because it relates to my research interest, but because it is going to be illustrative of this transition from the sorcerer into the scientist. And that's kind of what I want to look at in the next couple slides.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder like what phase we're in now.
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear that we're, that our magicians have transformed into scientists, right? And I have some speculations about, I don't know what Frazer's going to say after this. I haven't gotten into that, but I have a feeling like where this is going to go in the next slide is what I've called the revenge of the nerds. But right, clearly we have this clear transition from magicians to scientists. You have individuals who are kind of, people still very much look to these individuals, like they'll have them on a pedestal as if they're like some very powerful sorcerer. So let's go to the next slide if we can, because it's relevant to your question.
And I would say even in the alternative space, that dynamic is still happening.
Sure. Well, yeah, of course, because this is woven into the human frame. It's impossible to get away from. Something we'll look at towards the end of the presentation is even when Christianity comes, right, and Christianizes all these pagan practices, right, and creates this firm line of demarcation between this unfolding in pagan cultures, it still the idea of deification still gets creeping in. It's still creeping in to those early congregations. We'll look at that. But for right now, let's look at the Revenge of the Nerds slide. And I have a little commentary for this. And
excellent.
This
is
quite a slide. I feel like it's a good slide. I feel like I'm an artist. Right?
You are. This is your art.
Right. So this is 100% my thought. I do not know if someone would say that this necessarily follows from what Frazer is saying. It's kind of a Nietzschean take. So one might speculate beyond James Frazer's explicit intent in Chapter 7 of The Golden Bough that the emergence of the scientific technocrat marks a subtle retribution for the magician class's earlier suppression under sacred kings and religious hierarchies. Once central in primitive societies, magicians faced demotion as their craft was branded black art by priests and their influence eclipsed by despotic rulers. Yet as magic evolves into science, these early practitioners' successors, scientists, reassert dominance, overturning the old religious order and seizing authority through empirical methods. This imagined reversal where science supplants divine rule is reflected in modern projects like CERN's Alice experiment, blending alchemical roots with rational discovery. So the idea that I'm going for here, there's always like this like natural like antinomy, or at least it's been naturalized. Like I remember in like the 90s, like Time magazine or Newsweek would have these articles like religion or science, which side, which one are you on? And I was like, even when I was like 13 years old, I was like, oh, these endeavors deal with different subject matters. One's dealing with matter, the other is dealing with the absolute or spirit or something like that. So why it's like trying to say, which do you like better, football or basketball? They're different games. Like, I might be more of a football guy or a basketball guy, but they're not negating each other. That's how it's always seemed like a very weird dilemma. But someone is driving this narrative that religion has ossified, it is dead, and now we're taking back control. The magicians are back in control. We've just rebranded as scientists.
That's interesting.
And you see it, right? Like they like like even in these images here, right? Like the propaganda is such, like Neil deGrasse Tyson is science. Like he is the incarnation of that power, right? And the same deal with like this silly cartoon with Fauci, where he's like, I am science, like, and you can't question it because it's like heresy or something like that, right? It kind of reflects the all-powerful sorcerer from the past.
Is the idea of science, has it always been sort of a myth? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I was taught that science is a methodology, it's an approach to inquiry. Were we misguided all along? Right now, the biggest proponents of, quote, science seem to be very dogmatic. Is there hope for science? I don't know.
It's worse than ever. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's a methodology, right? It's just, it's if you have an understanding of the history of science, is that it's frequently very wrong, and that's how science improves, by learning from all the errors that it makes. And so you can never really hold on to something with such infinite passion. You always have to be prepared that our scientific frameworks are provisional. And so, you know, you wake up one day, the earth is flat. You wake up the next day, you're in a geocentric universe. You wake up the next day, you're in a heliocentric universe. Who knows what you'll wake up with tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, and you go back the same, you know, people who believed in, quote, science and, quote, religion, it wasn't always this contrarian thing. Like, they weren't mutually exclusive, like you said, where one ends, one begins.
Well, there's been, you know, I wouldn't say it's a completely new phenomenon that's occurred over the past 25 or 30 years. I mean, there have been periods in American history where there's been great debate between science and religion. Obviously, like the Scopes monkey trial was a big deal in the, I believe, was that in the early 20th century or late 19th century? You know, that whole evolution debates. And then, of course, you could cite other individuals like that were supposedly persecuted by the Catholic Church, like Galileo. I mean, it's not like this tension between science and religion is completely new.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
Totally fair. My hunch is a lot of it comes down to control. What narratives do we need to control to get the outcome that we want?
All right. Maybe.
I'm
trying to talk about. I'm
this cartoon here.
I know. Well, look, someone could say, "Hey, Luke, you're cherry picking. Like you're a prophet."
Cherry picking.
Yeah, you're the worst propagandist of all. So I'm trying to communicate something with these images.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, remember when everyone was talking about the replication crisis in psychology?
It's not just psychology.
But it was like different huge disciplines there. But yeah, like I just remember them coming out and saying like, oh, actually, most of the literature cannot be replicated. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah.
No. All right.
I'm not anti-science, though. It's really interesting that you and I are having this conversation, given we both have a pretty, I would say, robust background in philosophy of science.
Yeah.
And anyway, but it's kind of like the deeper you get into it, the more landmines you become aware of. It's not that it's totally not a valid way to approach inquiry. There's a lot of things to consider.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've said this in other podcasts, if anyone is curious about this conversation that Jordan and I are having, you want to pursue it more in depth, and you just to make sure that Jordan and I aren't just riffing and pulling things out of our ass, you want to check out Kuhn's History of Scientific Revolutions. That's
for sure.
Start there, and you'll have fun with that.
Yeah, that's a great start.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk about John Dee. Can we go to slide 103?
You got it.
Okay. So, yeah. So we're talking about this, how the sorcerers become scientists. And I found this great article that I highly recommend. John Dee and the Sciences, Early Modern Networks of Knowledge by Jennifer Rampling. So I would take some time to find that. By the way, this is a painting. I thought it was a great painting. This is John Dee performing an experiment before Queen Elizabeth I. It's an oil painting by Henry Gillard Glendoni. I thought this was great. So Jennifer M. Rampling's 2012 article examines John Dee's contributions to the evolution of alchemy into early modern chemistry through his scholarly networks. Dee, a mathematician and alchemist, maintained a library of over 3,000 volumes, including alchemical works by Geber and Roger Bacon, which informed his Monus Hieroglyphica, 1564, a treatise integrating symbolic and empirical approaches to material transformation. In Prague, under Rudolf II, Dee's experiments with Edward Kelly employed practical techniques such as distillation that anticipated chemical methods. His connections with European scholars, including followers of Paracelsus, disseminated these practices, influencing the scientific revolution. Dee's angelic dialogues, recorded in the Libra Mystoriorum, sought systematic alchemical knowledge, reflecting an early scientific impulse. This aligns with Frazer's The Golden Bough, Chapter 7, where alchemy's empirical methods underpinned chemistry's emergence, marking a transition from magic to science. So I just thought this was one interesting example to keep some continuity between all the different episodes that we've done about how John Dee more appropriately fits into Frazer's schema. I've tried to shoehorn him in there, but he's not exactly the type of magician that Frazer has in mind, but he will serve as the type of magician that helped make the transition into modern science possible through these methods that are outlined.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward, but it's good to kind of know about, we've talked about the more sensational aspects of John Dee, the talking to angels, which is going to come back into play when we look at CERN. And we've talked about possible connections to Eyes Wide Shut, et cetera, in the space program through the Enochian language that got picked up by Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and all of that. But practically, just these alchemical techniques made it possible so we can have modern chemistry, which really does improve the lives of a lot of people. Like there's like lots of good science going on in chemistry.
Yeah.
So, and there's some bad science going on in chemistry and erroneous science, but clearly we've had some better living through chemistry.
Totally.
Not the best. We're not done. There's a lot more to do, and I'm not saying they get everything right, but we've got to give them credit where it's due. All right. Anything else about John Dee before I move on?
Nothing that won't take us severely off track.
Yeah, we're on slide 104 now, and we've got 10 more to go. So we're a half hour into this, but the next 5 should go pretty quick. So I talked earlier about temporary deification in the early phase of religion. And slides 104 and 105 are just the indexing of all the temporary forms of incarnation and deification that occur there. There's, I was specifically drawn to the ones in ancient Greece, like with the, if you look here on slide 104, you have the priestesses, they would drink lamb or bull blood to prophesy, embodying divine knowledge. They felt like actually ingesting the blood would allow for some sort of possession to take over and they'd be temporarily deified, right? But the one that really caught my attention was the top of slide 105. And it was just a detail that was super interesting to me because I didn't know this, but also in ancient Greece with the Delphic oracle, the prophetess would consume the laurel and the bacchanals would eat the ivy, and that this would send them into frenzy prophetic states. And I just thought that was super interesting. And while I was doing that, I was also researching this whole alchemical announcement that they made at CERN about turning lead into gold. And I remembered in the back of my mind that CERN actually is rumored to connect to Apollo, and which would get us to the Delphic Oracle, because Apollo slayed the Python at the Delphic Oracle, right? I think I have that right. Anyhow, so let's go to slide 106, unless you want to dwell on any of these temporary forms of incarnation or deification. There's lots of different ones. In southern India, the priests would suck goat's blood to channel Kali's oracular responses. So there's that.
So to be clear, this is the temporary embodiment?
Yeah, sure. Temporary incarnation or deification.
Possession by gods?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what this is.
Oh.
Okay. So I want to talk
Let's go.
Yeah, I want to talk about CERN and Apollo for a second. So, we have the Delphic Oracle over here in the top right. This is one of the more famous paintings of her, or of a priestess of Apollo. Mm-hmm. It's rumored this is the the Alice experiment where the lead into gold was achieved recently. CERN is a sprawling complex, and a big part of the land that it sits on top of was this town called Saint Genus Pauli or something like that. And etymologically, I don't speak French, so I'm not exactly sure what it's saying there, but it was formerly Saint Genus Pauli, was called Pauli Saint Genus or Saint Genix. It was in 1887 that the definitive appellation Saint Genus Pauli appeared in the registers of the civil status. Pauli comes from the Latin Pauliacum, and it's probable that under Roman occupation, the village temple was dedicated to Apollo. I got this from this website right here that you can check out, and that's where those images are from. So it's rumored that CERN sits on top of a town that was dedicated to the temple of Apollo. Now, whether or not that's in fact true requires deeper digging. You'll go into it. But I also thought it was interesting. This is Apollo 9 astronaut Rusty Schreickert. I listened to this talk that CERN actually has on their website that he gave there in 1968 June of 1969, right before the Apollo 11 moon landing. Yeah. So I just think that's interesting that we have lead being turned into gold on top of a town that was possibly dedicated to Apollo and possibly had a Delphic oracle there. So does that mean that it's not a strong connection, but it is interesting to me? It is interesting to me. Yeah. Okay.
What are they doing at CERN?
Well, it's a big question. It's a big question. The Mandela effect, if you believe the internet. So, okay. All right. So now I want to look at the non-Christian forms of permanent deification that I referenced earlier. So in the Golden Bough Chapter 7, Sir James Frazer explores the phenomenon of permanent deification in primitive societies, where select individuals are venerated as living gods due to their extraordinary supernatural powers. Frazer argues that these human deities, arising from a universal belief in shared supernatural abilities, are worshipped through prayers, sacrifices, and rituals, often holding significant spiritual or political sway, marking a shift from fluid human divine boundaries to structured theocratic systems. For instance, in the Marquesas and Washington Islands, solitary men believed to wield control over natural elements and disease dwelt in secluded reverence, demanding human sacrifices, as exemplified by an old man encircled by skeletons who required frequent offerings. In ancient Egypt, a man at Anubis was honored with burnt sacrifices as a divine being, yet partook of mortal meals, embodying both human and godly essence. Among the Todas of southern India, a sacred milkman asserted divine status, issuing oracles and receiving prostrations, untouchable except by fellow milkmen, demonstrating how even humble roles could carry divine authority. Through these examples, Frazer illustrates how permanent deification, deeply rooted in primitive thought, forged enduring religious and political frameworks, laying the foundation for advanced conceptions of divinity. And I've mentioned through the title page, the one that was most interesting to me that were of the non-Christian options was Empedocles in classical antiquity. In Sicily and Athens, Empedocles claims he could control the weather, that he could resurrect, and Athenians honored Demetrius as savior god with altars and hymns. So I wanted to dig. I knew Empedocles as a philosopher. I did not know about this claim that he was a god. And so I want to dig a little bit into that, and actually has an influence on Carl Jung, which is going to get us to the Jungian interpretation of CERN.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm just like casually jumping around. This is kind of a big deal.
How fun.
It is fun. So you might want to give them a chance to screenshot.
Yeah. It's been up a while.
Yeah. Grab the screenshot now if you want of this, and you might want to switch. You just progress to the next two if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Are any of them jumping out to you? I mean, I don't know if you can see.
Unique vocabulary. That's... Wouldn't have thought about that.
Yeah.
Seeks godhood. Siam's king revered with unique... they revere him using interesting words?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I first read that, I was thinking like he is embodying this god and that like exhibiting unique vocabulary. That makes more sense.
Well, that's a phenomenon, like the speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
What's the technical? It's like glossophilia or something like that.
Oh, I don't know. There's different phrases for it. Like there's some interesting phrases for it in the South. And then like now you'll see people too like speaking like light language or all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, glossophilia.
Okay, the last one. Huh.
Yeah, I'm just anxious.
You're what?
I'm just anxious to get to Empedocles.
Is that on the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to look a little closer at the deification, the permanent deification of Empedocles. All right. So Empedocles, who lived from 494 to 434 BCE, a pre-Socratic philosopher and poet from Acragas, Sicily, was a charismatic figure known for his philosophical, medical, and political contributions in ancient Greece. He authored 2 poetic works on nature and purifications preserved as fragments, which outline his cosmological and spiritual doctrines. In On Nature, he theorized that 4 eternal elements, earth, air, fire, and water, are governed by love and strife, while purifications advocated reincarnation, claiming he had lived as various beings seeking purification through ethical living. Empedocles believed in a cyclical universe, soul transmigration, and his own divinity, asserting miraculous powers such as calming storms, healing the sick, and reviving the dead, as Frazer notes in the Golden Bough, Chapter 7. For instance, he reportedly stopped destructive winds in Akragas by suspending animal skins and restored a woman thought dead to life, earning worshippers garlands. His claim to godhood stemmed from Pythagorean beliefs in a purified soul, his demonstrated miracles, and cultural reverence for philosopher healers, positioning him as a divine figure in a society that blurred human-divine boundaries. So you can see here is his conception of the cosmos. I'm not prepared to philosophically go too deep into it, except it's important to recognize how it's driven by love and strife, this pair of opposites, which is going to get into Jung and opposites. But this painting over here on the left, Jordan, is The Death of Empedocles by Salvador Rosa. There's lots of different legends about how Empedocles died. Some people think that he jumped into a volcano so that he would not leave a corpse behind, and that people would think that he like ascended or like just merged, exited reality. And there's like stories about how his shoe was like coughed back up by the volcano, and it kind of ruined his attempt at preserving his godhood. There's lots of different stories, but I thought this was interesting about him jumping into Mount Etna in Sicily.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty metal.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I don't think I'm a god if I just get incinerated in this volcano. That's a legend. No, I'm not some expert. There's lots of different takes on what he died from, but that's one of them.
Got it. Yeah. Immediately, what came to mind when you're talking about love and chaos, I was just thinking about the lecture in Donnie Darko. Not quite the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What is it? Love and Fear, right?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Who knew? Like, that'd be a hot take for Donnie Darko. What's the name of the gym teacher who's teaching that lesson?
I don't remember her name, but it's hilarious.
She
There's a bunch of horses in there.
That's right.
There's a lot of, yeah.
That's right.
And I love how he kind of rejects it.
Oh, he gets in trouble for telling her to shove the exercise up her butt.
Using casual language. But yeah. It's like intense. So anyway, there's a lot to this like duality, which I think you're going to go more into.
I am going to go more into it. So let's go. I'm going to circle back to that. Where am I going to circle back at? I'm going to talk about that in slide 112, I think. Am I going to do that in 112?
I can't see the numbers, by the way.
Oh, weird. But I'm going to do that in slide 113. But what we're going to do, we're going to wrap up. If you can go to the slide after Empedocles. That's weird that you can't see the numbers.
It's because I'm in slideshow view.
Oh, okay. All right.
And I don't. Sometimes I have like another window open with it. But
all right. So just mentally bracket Empedocles and the Jung connection, and we're going to circle back to that. Okay.
Circle back to the circles of circles.
Yes, we are. A lot of circling back. Okay. So I mentioned I wanted to separate the forms of permanent deification, the Christian forms of that, from the non-Christian forms, because I have a bias towards Christianity as one who identifies as a Christian. And I find everything about Christianity infinitely more interesting than the non-Christian stuff. Let's be real. So there's actually, I was surprised. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that, and Frazer points this out, that this permanent deification streak did not go away within Christianity. And so Frazer explores permanent deification within Christianity, where certain sects and individuals claim divine status, reflecting primitive beliefs that blur the human-divine divide. Frazer argues that these assertions, often equaling or surpassing Jesus's own divinity, reveal a persistent tendency to attribute godhood to mortals, infusing Christian doctrine with extravagant claims. For instance, in the 2nd century, Montanus the Phrygian proclaimed himself the Incarnate Trinity, embodying God the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. All of them, not just the Son, all three, inspiring followers to practice mutual adoration. So they were gods too. In the 13th century, the brethren and sisters of the free spirit held that deep contemplation united them with the Godhead, equating them to Christ and freeing them from human and divine laws, a belief expressed through erratic behavior and defiance of societal norms. In the 1830s, near Kentucky, an impostor declared himself the Son of God, promising global destruction, but was unmasked as a fraud when he couldn't speak German, undermining his divine pretense. The locals asked him to speak German, and he didn't know how to do it. These cases underscore Frazer's point that Christian deification mirrors primitive supernaturalism, shaping unorthodox beliefs. So I had those in their own separate little chart, but yeah, this, it doesn't go away. And I mean, it shouldn't be surprising. We've had other people who claim to, people who come out of the Christian tradition who see themselves as like second coming of Christ, or they think of themselves as like the Antichrist or something like that. So it's just, it's been this idea of there being like radical fringe sects that, where people are elevating themselves to a level of godhood within Christianity, that this has been going on since the beginning of Christianity. This is not a 20th century phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of fixated on this last one. Like, did he claim he could speak German? Like, could Yeshua speak every language?
Well, that's an interesting thing. So I tried to dig up some like news clippings and things like this. This happening, like, it wasn't even like really well defined where it happened in Kentucky. I don't know where I couldn't find anything on the internet about it. Just Frazer mentions it. I trust that he had some sources for it. But I think there were like some German settlers that he was trying to like convert into his cult or his sect. And they were like, you're going to have to talk to us in German if we're going to believe you on this. And he couldn't do it. And they're like, you can't be God if you don't speak German. And that's kind of a remarkable test. So it's an interesting question. Could Jesus speak all the languages in the world? And if he couldn't speak one of them, does that mean he wasn't the Christ? Now, as far as we know, he spoke Hebrew, he spoke Aramaic, and he spoke Greek, right? Well,
yeah.
Well, we know he spoke. He spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. Let me. You keep talking. I want to make sure. What?
Yeah. You fact check yourself.
Yeah, I am.
Because
the Bible is written in those three.
When we did our Gospel of Luke deep dive, we were talking about how he had to learn things. He didn't have instantaneous access to everything.
So
and perhaps at a certain point in his development that changed, but
well, we know he definitely spoke Aramaic and Hebrew. Google AI says Greek, and some people claim some Latin, but I mean, we don't really know. It's not like he was given some sort of linguistic. As far as we know, he never failed a linguistic test. But like, could he speak like all the languages of Africa? Would it make a difference if he couldn't?
Yeah.
The world may never know. I mean, this is getting into a conversation.
We won't. I was just like, that's just such an interesting litmus test. And would
it's logic
Yeshua pass it?
Yeah. Well, so far as we know, he could at least speak 3 or 4 languages.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter. I was just interested.
No. Had we had a record of him not, I think that would be an interesting conversation. But we're inventing problems that aren't there.
Always.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the slide with Jung and CERN.
We're there.
So
Let's go.
We've got I'm calling it setting the stage for science. I keep making allusion to this recent discovery that CERN turned lead into gold. You can see here that this was announced. I've got the headline. Oh, it's just saying 2 days ago, but it
Very recently.
happened the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And we've got, and I've been like deeply interested in CERN. I was always CERN, the whole Mandela effect and CERN like really woke me up. So I like used to obsess over CERN back in like 2016. I don't really think about it too much now, but it's kind of impossible for me to ignore when they're fulfilling the Philosopher's Stone here. You see John Dee and Edward Kelly in their magic circle talking to a ghost, something in a graveyard here. And I couldn't help but think like, man, just like the Alice experiment, the CERN logo, like everything just looks like a mandala and or a magic circle. And I just like, what would Jung say about this? Like, I'm very interested in what Jung would say about the Apollo programs. And it's really not that far off to see what Jung would say about CERN. So I want to talk about John Dee, Carl Jung, and the CERN alchemical experiment a little bit. So John Dee, driven by Christian piety, which is shocking to many, invoked angels to uncover the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, a substance reputed to transmute lead into gold and confer eternal life, viewing these communications as divinely sanctioned acts akin to biblical prophecy. From 1582, Dee and Edward Kelly conducted scrying sessions with a crystal ball, engaging angels like Uriel to reveal alchemical knowledge as recorded in the Libra Mysteriorum. This practice, rooted in his belief that God's agents could illuminate natural truths, aligns with Frazer's The Golden Bough, Chapter 7 depiction of temporary deification, where prophetic insight is sought. Superficially, this resonates with CERN's particle physics, where evocative names like ghost particles, neutrinos, the God particle, the Higgs boson, and charm quarks mere mystical language, though grounded in empirical science. CERN's 2025 Alice experiment, transmuting lead into gold via nuclear collisions, fulfills Dee's alchemical dream, scientifically suggesting a synchronicity. Both endeavors, centuries apart, probe nature's transformative essence, echoing Frazer's magic to science arc and the divine aspirations of Christian and non-Christian deification. From a Jungian lens, CERN's symbolic emergence embodies a collective individuation process, weaving together opposites to heal a fragmented world. Jung's individuation unites polarities, material versus spiritual, conscious versus unconscious, individual versus collective, and order versus chaos, to forge psychic wholeness. CERN's lead to gold transmutation, reminiscent of the alchemical Philosopher's Stone, merges empirical science with spiritual yearning, symbolizing the self. Its mandala-like Alice logo and evocative particle names such as God particle or charm quarks bridge rational thought with mythic depths, fostering unity. Emerging from the collective unconscious, these symbols counter modern society's materialism, alienation, and division, rekindling shared meaning akin to Frazer's deification rituals. Through Jung's synchronicity, CERN's imagery responds to spiritual voids, guiding humanity toward balance. Critics who see quantum discoveries as destabilizing overlook their role as necessary disruptions, compelling engagement with the unconscious and reflecting the psyche's complexity. The mandala's symmetry anchors this chaos, steering society toward renewed purpose, much like Frazer's deified figures. There is so much to unpack with all of this, but that is just a very quick gloss on this, where I'm trying to synthesize what I know about Jung and what he has to say about these things. It's almost like the obsession with knowing pure material is causing this shift in consciousness to produce these symbols that will provide some sort of comfort from that one-sided emphasis in the pursuits of man. So this raises a very interesting question about whether or not those particles truly exist, or if we are seeing things that are not there as the result of consciousness trying to shift us away from this uneven focus, right? And I'm not really sure. I probably shouldn't say that, because it it sounds so heretical to whatever this monolithic understanding of science, but I need to get my head more around this. And I think Jung's work on flying saucers is relevant. He said the same thing. Like he thought that if the collective was seeing these flying saucers, they may not even objectively be there. There's sort of this thing that is happening within the shared consciousness. And then he kind of backpedaled a little bit. It's like, no, they're objectively out there, but like we're projecting something onto it. That's like, and this is relevant for some sort of shift in epochs. So I don't know if Jung would say that these particles and the work of CERN is actually real or not. But it's whether he may say it doesn't even really matter. What matters is that symbols are finding a way back in that is forcing us to have to one way or the other look deeper into the composition of the psyche.
Yeah.
And and I'm sorry to cut you off. It certainly has done that. Like if I hadn't experienced the Mandela effect and learned about CERN and a possible connection, would I even be talking about Carl Jung's model of the psyche? I wouldn't. So it's I personally,
really,
yeah, I wouldn't. I wasn't. Why would I? I'm a trained philosopher. Why would I preoccupy myself with fringe subject matters and analytic psychology? This is totally.
For me and my friends obsessed with it at 15.
But I'm saying for me personally,
So
I'm
funny.
sort of proof that the symbolism at CERN and in the
Brought you back.
it actually brought me to Carl Jung's model of the psyche.
Whoa. I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
Yeah, Mandela effect woke me up, and all the weird rituals and symbols at CERN. I was like, okay, like this is it. I'm gonna become a kooky person now. I have no other choice. Do I want the truth? I'm going to have to look insane to the rest of the world.
That's so true.
Sorry to cut you off. I wanted to complete that thought.
Yeah, no, that's super rich. Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking, so you kind of laid out two angles Jung sort of like went to, one coming later, but the first being there's nothing there, we're just seeing the symbols in the physical.
There's no real I'm not saying that Jung would say this, but I think it's on the table with what he says about flying saucers, that there may not actually be an objective correlate to the visions that everyone's seeing, and that this could be a mass hallucination with symbols that are married to it in order to cause a confrontation with his model of the psyche or the unconscious.
That's well put. And then the second is around possibly there's something real there. We're interpreting it through our perception to be flying saucers, perhaps incorrectly.
And perhaps God particles too.
Right. I wonder too, there's a third option on the table here, which relates to everything else we talked about. Are we projecting out and creating in the physical corollaries, like physical reflections of the psychic material? Is it manifesting? Is it being created on the 3D plane as a result of our collective obsession following down these like lines of inquiry? I mean, this was high effort. Digging this in high effort.
The implication is all the energy and labor that has gone on at CERN for decades and decades and decades is just to recalibrate the one-sided focus of humanity back to a more spiritual science, a more integrated spiritual science.
But what if that's what we're constantly doing? Like we're projecting out and pulling ourselves forward over and over and over again.
Maybe so.
I don't know.
I mean, the same line of thinking is going to be irrelevant to my research into the Apollo program.
Exactly.
It's a brief digression, but it's going to be the same kind of model.
We talked about this when we did the breakdown of the Audrey poem like almost a year ago
The
now.
Auden poem. The Auden.
Auden.
Yeah, you're you're
Thank you.
conflating Robert Ardrey from African Genesis and W.H.
Thank you.
Auden.
It's great.
Yeah, no, it's totally acceptable. I'm so tired, and we've gone so long. I've
Oh,
fumbled.
true.
I've fumbled like 5 words in this presentation.
I didn't notice. But yeah, like this idea of like we have to keep creating these external milestones to go after and after. We were talking the other day about like manifest destiny or like man like conquering and like just there's this constant external pull. Will we ever run out of things to go towards? Do we keep creating things to go towards? Or at some point do we run out of stuff and it like breaks the psyche and we finally go inward? I don't know.
I'm just looking for the new Jerusalem to descend upon Earth. I don't know. I don't know the future. That's
Is that New Earth?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is the Earth purified, and maybe CERN has a role in it because like it's going to create some black hole and it cause a worldwide conflagration, and God's going to operate through that fire to cleanse the Earth. I don't know. But
Whoa.
I don't know. I mean, we're told from a Christian perspective that the Earth is going to be purified with fire at the end of time.
Fair enough.
I don't think we're really told how. So.
Yeah. Well, and then like, what kind of fire are we talking about?
No, yeah.
Fire being ether.
I don't know.
We've spoken about that, and I can't even tell you when we spoke about like the Heraclitus.
Oh yeah. We talked about Jung and the connection with Heraclitus. I want to, if it's okay, I'd like to move to the next slide to talk about Jung and Empedocles, where you can actually, and if you want to take a screenshot of this, he doesn't have like an essay on Empedocles, but there are different places where he mentions him in passing or kind of talks about him more at length. So let's keep that up there. I'm going to read the following paragraph. So this is going to connect it together. Carl Jung's psychological framework finds a profound antecedent in Empedocles' cosmological vision of the Spheros, a divine, perfectly round whole where the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water, are unified by love against the divisive force of strife, embodying a holy and unutterable mind, which prefigures Jung's archetype of the self as a psychic totality, integrating opposites like conscious and unconscious. Empedocles' dynamic interplay of love and strife cycling between cosmic unity and chaos mirrors Jung's individuation process of reconciling polarities, rational versus irrational, material versus spiritual, often symbolized by mandalas or spheres, reflecting a collective striving for balance. In modernity, this resonance manifests in symbols like CERN's mandala-like Alice logo, which through its imagery of transmutation and symmetry responds to societal fragmentation, aligning with Jung's concept of synchronicity, where such symbols restore spiritual equilibrium, thus bridging Empedocles' ancient unity with Jung's quest for psychic wholeness. So, thought that was interesting. Could do a whole thing. I've talked to Jordan, and possibly I'll do this in the near future, where a focus of mine in the near future, maybe just dwelling on Jung and his Wotan essay, given that Kanye West is making a lot of waves right now. So I feel like that would be a really worthwhile endeavor. But for right now, you can see where Empedocles' thought is feeding Jung's own theories.
Totally.
All right. So I want to close out with looking at the Shiva statue at CERN and kind of bringing this all together. I think Jordan knows a little bit more about Shiva than I do.
Maybe.
All right.
Maybe a smidge.
I was going to include something in the title card, and I was like, it just got too long, and I was like, this is kind of extra. This is bonus material. So are you on slide 114, the last one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. This image is crazy. So
Yeah.
this statue is outside CERN, but this Neil Greenberg blog, he picked up on this as well. A lot of conspiracy theory people go, "Oh, this is Shiva, the destroyer. They're going to destroy the world at CERN." And it's like, maybe we should look at this through a Jungian lens. The 2-meter tall bronze statue of Lord Shiva as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, unveiled outside CERN in Geneva in 2004 as a gift from India, symbolizes the interplay of creation and destruction, mirroring the subatomic dance of particles studied at CERN. In Hindu mythology, Shiva, part of the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the destroyer, dissolves illusions and cosmic cycles to enable renewal, while his role as Pashupati, Lord of Animals, nurtures all living beings, embodying creative life force. His Nataraja dance, with a Damaru drum, whose primal sound sparks creation, and a flame signifying destruction within a ring of flames, harmonizes these opposites, reflecting CERN's particle collisions that destroy matter to reveal the universe's origins. The lingam, symbolizing Shiva's regenerative energy and transcendence, further underscores his creative power, often paired with the feminine yoni. Shiva's dual life as ascetic and householder reconciles detachment and engagement. For Carl Jung, this statue would represent a profound archetypal symbol from the collective unconscious, embodying the coincidence of opposites, creation and destruction, order and chaos, central to individuation, as explored in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Jung saw Hindu deities like Shiva as manifestations of the psyche's transformative power, with the cosmic dance balancing conscious and unconscious forces and the lingam's creative energy akin to the alchemical self, resonating with CERN's quest for his universal truths. The statue thus bridges mythic symbolism, scientific inquiry, and Jungian psychology, embodying Shiva's transformative unity. So I just thought that was super interesting. I don't think I have a complete theory about how Jung would handle everything that's going on at CERN right now, but hopefully through a few of these slides, which got us away from Frazer, although as anyone who's been following along knows, that Jung developed a lot of his archetypal theory from the indexing of Frazer, and we can see how John Dee and his alchemical pursuits in some ways have laid down the foundation for this lead into gold experiment that happened at CERN, right? Like, even though it's removed by hundreds of years, but some of those simple techniques ultimately culminated in this. And the quest of the magicians and the sorcerers never really died. It's still there. It's just kind of rebranded. And we can see through this process as well the influence of Empedocles upon Jung. So I think we covered a tremendous amount of information. These things are so dense, and I hope everyone got something out of it. So now I'm going to ask you, Jordan, after we've gone through all of that, do you feel any sort of amendment or upgrade to your understanding of what science and magic are? I mean, it's a lot to take in.
I think it's just it's so blurry and hard to pinpoint when you're in a moment of time. Like, if I'm to look around right now and call this magic, and that's like, I don't know that they're that different to me all the time, or at least the way that they seem to be done. But what really stuck out when you were reading what you were just reading was the dissolution of illusion.
Yeah. And the creative aspect of Shiva, which I think is lost in a lot of conspiracy talk too, right? This balancing act between destruction and creation.
Yeah. But regardless of what you think the impact of CERN is, whether you think it's purely a scientific, like, materialist endeavor, or if you think there's some deeper magic happening there, either way, it seems to be one of these things that is helping all of us move through the illusion.
Well, that's right. Like, that's the thing. Like, this is like the secret third thing that we've been talking about here. Is you've got your modern science believer who's like, oh, worshiping at Neil deGrasse Tyson's feet or whatever. They'd be like, oh, this is so silly. Like, there's nothing going on at CERN. They're just smashing particles. Well, clearly that's a kind of an untenable position when you look at all the symbolism, right? And the open, alchemical experiments from lead to gold. Like, clearly, like, you have to ignore a lot of evidence to be like, nothing funny is happening here. And you have the conspiracy people who are like, they're going to destroy the world and they're changing the timelines and things like that. And, I'm a big believer in this Mandela effect phenomenon. I don't necessarily think it's attached to CERN. I don't know who I would attribute it to, but I think attributing it to CERN doesn't really capture what's going on there.
Yeah.
But this third thing, right, is that this is Jungian psychology unfolding in order to redirect humanity because we've made an error and become too one-sided. And that in a way, the science, like the modern understanding of science, people are not going to like that because it's like this fringe psychology perspective. And the conspiracy people aren't going to like that because it sounds positive. And they want this to be apocalyptic and the end of the world. And it may be the end of
a world as we know it.
A world, the end of the world as we know it. But ultimately, it's preparatory for a new confrontation with the collective unconscious. That seems, and in that way, it's not scary anymore. Like I can look at this Shiva statue and be like, oh, it's some weird demon, or oh gosh, they're gonna like create some kind of black hole. I don't have to be afraid of it anymore. And people freak out about CERN. People are really freaked out about it. And he's like, no, it's the reality making a correction.
And maybe we don't need to be afraid of any of these things.
Yeah.
What if they all can be an opportunity to step into a more expanded state of awareness?
I think that's what's going on. By the way, isn't it interesting? Like, I mean, so I guess CERN, they talk about like making black holes, right? They've named this experiment Alice, right? So
yes,
it's
down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So we're like playing with the symbolism of Alice in Wonderland. So that if this were just like materialist science where there's like no intentional signaling or something like that, why go to such efforts? Like, just
at minimum, someone has a sense of humor and playfulness.
Well, that's one way to explain it away.
Yeah.
But it's like, come on, guys. Like, you're not helping us everybody's like freaked out about conspiracy theory. It's like, stop doing stuff like this. Like, stop having dancing rituals. Stop like having mock sacrifices at CERN. Stop doing all these things. And then you won't drive all the conspiracy people crazy. Stop naming it. So clearly something else is happening there. And it's...
Yeah, but like you said, this is direct from your perspective.
It's a perspective I'm trying on. I'm trying to...
No. I'm saying this was a part of your journey.
Sure.
Into deep diving this fringe psychology.
Yeah.
Which seems to be the easiest to me framework to apply to what's going on in a somewhat cohesive manner.
Well, what it does is it allows for you to like maintain the mystery without ascribing it to a shadowy cabal. It's God and the reality itself organizing these things to create synchronistic phenomena. And then that way you don't have to worry about coming off as like a crazy conspiracy theorist, because like God is doing it, or the reality is doing it, or the Heraclitean fire is doing it. You don't have to say like
it's some group of people
exactly
somehow are able to manipulate reality in ways that we can't.
Sure.
They can, but we can't. Maybe that's the falsehood that we're all being initiated through.
Yeah.
We're not victims of some like elite class. Our creative power is available to us. Maybe you wouldn't go that far. Maybe you would say it's just the creative power of Prime Creator. But
I think we live in God's simulation, right? And
yeah,
that's where I'm shaking out on all this. All right,
it seems to be an interactive playground.
yeah, okay, I'll go with that.
Okay.
All right, I gotta get on the treadmill. Let's bring this one to a close.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Luke. This was really cool and I think really juicy. And
was a juicy one.
Yeah. And people can pressure you in the comments for a Kanye West Jungian analysis breakdown.
We'll see. I got a lot on my plate, but I'd like to.
I
Think
know. It would be
it's time.
spicy.
It would be time. All right. Thanks, Jordan.
You're welcome.